Nathan Hale wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted the grip on his wrench as he tightened the last bolt on the plasma drill. The dim, flickering light above cast elongated shadows across the metallic surface of the mining equipment. It was another long shift in the same endless cycle of repairing machines, keeping systems running, and making sure Helios 4 didn't fall apart at the seams. Life on the outpost was nothing if not predictable. Helios 4 wasn't much to look at. A floating mining station on the outer rim, it was the kind of place people either ended up at by necessity or tried their best to leave. There were no lush landscapes, no bustling trade routes, just a barren rock rich in minerals that only corporate interests seemed to care about. The station's corridors were lined with steel, illuminated by harsh, artificial lighting that hummed faintly in the silence. The air was stale, recycled one too many times, carrying the faint metallic scent of machinery and industrial grease. Nathan had been here for over 3 years, long enough for the novelty of deep space mining to wear off completely. He wasn't a dreamer or an explorer. He was a mechanic, plain and simple. He fixed things. That was his role in the grand scheme of things. If a machine was broken, he put it back together. If something sparked, jammed, or refused to operate, he made it work again. There was comfort in that. Logic, predictability. That predictability was what Nathan liked most about his job. He didn't believe in fate or destiny, didn't waste time thinking about the mysteries of the universe or whether something greater was out there watching. The universe, in his opinion, was cold, indifferent, and entirely mechanical. Everything functioned on rules: physics, engineering, circuits, and logic. If something failed, there was always a reason, and if you were smart enough, you could fix it. Tonight was supposed to be like every other night. The plasma drill had been acting up all day, so Nathan had taken it upon himself to strip it down and recalibrate its thermal regulators. It was tedious work, but he preferred it to dealing with people. He worked best alone, surrounded by the soft hum of machinery. As he finished tightening the last component, the overhead monitor flickered, displaying a systems update. He barely glanced at it, already anticipating the routine diagnostics readout. Then, the screen flashed red. Alert. Unidentified object approaching Helios 4. Nathan frowned. That was unusual. He wiped his hands on his work jumpsuit and straightened, eyes narrowing at the screen. The outpost wasn't exactly a hotspot for visitors. Ships rarely came by unless they were scheduled supply runs, and even those were few and far between. The alarm blared again, louder this time, echoing through the steel corridors of the station. The red warning lights flared to life, casting an eerie glow across the workshop. Nathan set his wrench down and tapped the station's intercom. "Control, this is Hale. What's going on?" A crackle of static, then a voice came through, gruff, tense. "We don't know. Something's coming in fast. No transponder code, no comms response. You should get up here." Nathan's stomach twisted slightly. Helios 4 had defenses, sure, but nothing that could stand against a real threat. And out here, so far from central authority, help was days, maybe weeks, away. Pushing down the uneasy feeling creeping into his gut, he grabbed his toolkit and made his way toward the control deck, the metal flooring clanking beneath his boots. As he walked through the corridors, he passed a few other workers, faces tense, eyes darting toward the overhead alerts. Something wasn't right. By the time he reached the main control hub, a small group had already gathered. A few engineers, some station security, and Chief Dawson, the man responsible for keeping Helios 4 running. He was an older guy, grizzled from years of working deep space stations. But right now, even he looked unsettled. Nathan stepped up beside him, eyes immediately locking onto the large central monitor displaying the station's external sensors. What he saw made his breath hitch. A massive ship, not human, was descending toward Helios 4. Its silhouette was sleek, predatory, and unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. The hull was black as void, but it gleamed under the distant starlight, reflecting a golden emblem near its side. The design was nothing like the bulky cargo freighters or military cruisers Nathan was used to. A ripple of tension ran through the room. "That's not one of ours," someone murmured. "No kidding," Dawson muttered, rubbing his chin. His eyes never left the screen. Still no response to our hails? Nothing, a comms officer confirmed. They're just coming in silent. Nathan crossed his arms. Pirates, he guessed. Someone scoffed. Pirates wouldn't fly something like that, and even if they did, they'd be broadcasting demands by now. So what the hell do they want? Nobody had an answer. Outside, the unidentified vessel continued its descent, slow and deliberate. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't broadcasting threats. It was just coming. Nathan wasn't sure why, but an unsettling chill ran down his spine. They're landing, the comms officer reported, voice tight, right outside the main docking bay. A heavy silence fell over the room. Dawson straightened. All right. Security, with me. Engineers, stay put until we figure out what's going on. Nathan exhaled sharply. The logical part of him said to listen, to stay where it was safe. But another part, the part that had been wound tight since the moment that alarm sounded, was telling him to move. Because, for reasons he couldn't explain, he had the distinct feeling that whoever was on that ship, they weren't here by accident. And somehow, some way, this had everything to do with him. Nathan stood among the tense cluster of engineers and security personnel, his eyes locked on the external monitor. The unidentified vessel had landed just outside the main docking bay, its massive form casting an ominous shadow over the outpost. There was no communication, no explanation, just the sheer weight of its silent arrival pressing against every nerve in his body. Helios 4 had never seen a ship like this before. It wasn't human, that much was obvious. The sleek black exterior shimmered unnaturally under the station's artificial floodlights, and near its bow, a golden insignia pulsed faintly, an emblem no one recognized. The docking bay security team had already taken position near the main entrance, weapons at the ready, but their rigid stances betrayed their uncertainty. Helios 4 wasn't built for defense, and whatever was inside that ship had arrived with intent. The air inside the station felt heavier, as if the entire outpost was bracing itself for something it couldn't quite understand. Nathan's fingers clenched around the edge of the console in front of him, his mind racing through possible explanations. None of them made sense. Then, with a deep, mechanical hiss, the ship's outer hull split apart. The docking bay vibrated slightly as a towering ramp extended downward, steam venting from its sides as the first figures emerged from the shadows. They weren't human. Nathan wasn't sure what he had expected, but what he saw sent a chill through him. A squad of armored figures descended in perfect formation, their steps synchronized, their silver armor reflecting the sterile lighting of the outpost. They moved with an unnatural precision, the kind that only came from years of discipline, or something even more ingrained. Their helmets obscured their faces, sleek and almost featureless, except for a faint glow in the visors. The sight of them alone sent an unspoken message. These were not scavengers, not wanderers, but soldiers, warriors. A murmur passed through the station's personnel. The security team tightened their grips on their weapons, but no one dared fire. Helios 4 had no idea what it was up against, and provoking an unknown force could turn a tense situation into something far worse. Then, as the final figure emerged from the ship, the very air seemed to shift. She was unlike any of the others. At the center of the formation walked a tall, commanding woman clad in battle-worn armor, the silver plating edged with deep blue patterns that pulsed faintly with energy. Her presence was undeniable, an aura of quiet authority that made everyone instinctively take a step back. Long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her piercing eyes, a shade of crystalline blue, swept over the room with an intensity that made Nathan feel exposed, as if she could see through him entirely. She moved with purpose, her expression unreadable, as if she were weighing something far beyond what any of them could comprehend. The station's commander, Dawson, finally found his voice, stepping forward with as much authority as he could manage. "Identify yourselves," he demanded. His tone was firm, but even he couldn't conceal the slight edge of unease beneath his words. "This is a private mining station under human jurisdiction. State your purpose." The woman didn't answer immediately, She simply regarded him for a moment, then shifted her gaze past him, past everyone, until her eyes landed on Nathan. The moment their eyes met, his breath caught in his throat. She didn't hesitate. With smooth, measured steps, she walked straight toward him, the surrounding soldiers parting without a word, as if they had always known this was where she was going. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to move, wanted to step back, to demand answers, but something in her gaze held him in place. There was something unnerving about the way she looked at him, not with hostility, nor with curiosity, but with recognition. Then, before he could even form a question, she reached out, resting her gloved hand lightly on his shoulder. "You," she murmured, her voice low but carrying an undeniable weight. "At last, I found you." The words sent a chill through him. "My lost prince." A strange silence fell over the docking bay. Nathan barely registered the confused murmurs around him, the looks of disbelief from the outpost workers. The woman's hand was still on his shoulder, her grip firm but not forceful, as if confirming something that only she understood. His mind struggled to process what she had just said. It had to be a mistake. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, shaking his head. His voice felt distant, as if coming from someone else. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman, Aurora, as he would later learn, didn't react the way he expected. She didn't argue, didn't try to convince him. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable as if waiting for something. Then, with a single nod, she turned to the soldiers surrounding her. "Take him." The order was quiet, but it carried the force of absolute command. Nathan barely had time to react before two of the armored figures moved forward with swift precision, their hands reaching for him. His instincts finally kicked in, and he jerked back. "Wait, what the hell are you doing?" The station's security team immediately raised their weapons. "Stand down," Dawson barked. "You can't just—" He never finished his sentence. With a flick of her hand, Aurora sent out a pulse of unseen energy, rippling through the air like a shockwave. Every weapon in the room was yanked from its owner's grasp, clattering to the ground with metallic thuds. The security team stumbled back, stunned, hands left empty before they even realized what had happened. Nathan's breath came in short, sharp bursts. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. One of the armored soldiers grabbed his wrist, firm but not painful, like they were handling something fragile yet invaluable. Panic surged in his chest. "I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not—" "You are," Aurora interrupted, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "And whether you remember or not, you have always belonged to us." A rush of cold fear gripped him as the soldiers started moving, guiding him toward the open ramp of the waiting ship. His pulse pounded in his ears, his mind screaming for a way out. The others in the docking bay stood frozen, unable to stop what was happening. Dawson stepped forward again, desperation cutting into his voice. "You can't just take him. He's a civilian." Aurora glanced at him briefly. "Not anymore." With that, Nathan was pulled onto the ship, the bright lights of Helios 4 fading behind him. The last thing he saw before the doors sealed shut was the stunned, helpless faces of his fellow workers, watching as he was taken away by beings who, just minutes ago, had been nothing more than a mystery. The ramp retracted, the ship's engines hummed to life, and in a matter of seconds, the massive vessel lifted off, disappearing into the dark expanse of space. Nathan's old life, his quiet, predictable life, was gone. And deep down, in the part of him that had no explanation, he knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Nathan felt the cold, unyielding grip of the armored soldiers tightening around his arms, his body surged with instinctive resistance. He wasn't a fighter, but every fiber of his being rebelled against the idea of being taken by force. He twisted sharply, wrenching one arm free, and drove his elbow back with as much strength as he could muster. His strike barely made an impact against the soldier's armor. The movement was met with nothing more than a slight shift in weight before the Celestian warrior's grip returned, even firmer than before. It was like fighting against stone. Nathan's breath came in short, rapid bursts, his mind scrambling for any possible escape. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The entire scene felt surreal, like a nightmare where everything was happening too fast for him to process. He saw the faces of his co-workers, engineers, security personnel, even Dawson, watching in helpless silence. Some looked horrified, others confused, but no one knew what to do. The weapons that had been stripped from them earlier lay scattered across the floor, useless in the face of whatever advanced technology these invaders possessed. He kicked out, twisting his body in an attempt to break free again, but the Celestian warriors didn't even flinch. Their grip didn't tighten in retaliation, nor did they strike him down for resisting. It was as if they viewed his struggle as inevitable, something they had anticipated and had no need to fight back against. That only made Nathan more furious. "Let me go!" His voice came out rough, more desperate than he wanted it to sound. "I don't know who you think I am, but I am not going anywhere with you." Aurora Valis, the woman who had ordered his capture, remained perfectly calm. Her piercing blue eyes studied him, unreadable, as if she were evaluating something beyond what anyone else in the room could see. She wasn't amused, wasn't impatient. She simply watched. Nathan's frustration boiled over. "Say something," he shouted at her. "Tell me why you're doing this." Aurora finally moved, stepping closer. The Celestian soldiers flanking him adjusted slightly, their stances shifting with precision, but they didn't react to his words. She studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice quiet, but unwavering. "You will understand soon." That was all she said before turning away, giving a short gesture to her soldiers. Without another word, they began to move, dragging Nathan toward the waiting ramp of their vessel. A new surge of panic gripped his chest. He dug his heels into the ground, resisting with everything he had. "No! You don't get to just take me! I'm not—" The ramp of the ship loomed ahead, and a horrifying realization crashed into him. If they got him inside, if those doors sealed shut, he was gone. His life as he knew it would be over. His pulse pounded in his ears, a mixture of terror and adrenaline fueling his last desperate attempt to break free. He threw his weight sideways, trying to slip out of their grasp, but his captors adjusted effortlessly, shifting their hold without any sign of strain. Dawson's voice finally cut through the chaos. "You can't do this! He's a civilian!" Aurora didn't stop walking, didn't even turn back to acknowledge the outpost commander's protest. "Not anymore." That was when the first gunshot rang out. One of the outpost security officers, someone either brave enough or desperate enough, had gone against every survival instinct and fired on the Celestians. The energy round streaked across the air, hitting one of the armored warriors directly in the chest. The shot should have knocked them back, should have done something. Instead, the impact was absorbed in an instant. A faint shimmer rippled across the armor where the energy blast had connected, and the warrior didn't so much as flinch. Nathan barely had time to register the failure before everything descended into chaos. More shots were fired, security officers scrambling for their discarded weapons, trying to reclaim control of the situation. The Celestian soldiers reacted with terrifying efficiency, moving in perfect synchronization. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. With a single movement, one of the soldiers extended their hand, and the air itself seemed to warp. A wave of invisible energy pulsed outward. The security officers were thrown back as if struck by an unseen force, weapons flying from their hands. The entire outpost seemed to tremble under the weight of whatever advanced technology the Celestians were wielding. Nathan's stomach dropped. They weren't just stronger. They were beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The fight was over before it even began. Helios 4 fell into stunned silence. The humans, completely outmatched, lay scattered across the docking bay, disarmed and disoriented. No casualties, no excessive violence, just a perfectly executed display of power that left no room for argument. Nathan's legs refused to move as he was pulled up the ramp, his mind reeling. The last thing he saw before the ship's doors sealed shut was Dawson, still on his feet, watching helplessly as one of his own was taken away. His expression wasn't just one of anger or frustration, it was defeat. Then the ship's interior swallowed Nathan whole. The transition was abrupt. One moment he was in the dim, metallic docking bay of Helios 4. The next, he was inside something completely different. The Celestian vessel wasn't like any human ship Nathan had ever seen. The walls shimmered like liquid silver, pulsing faintly with a soft blue energy that almost seemed alive. The air was cleaner, crisper than anything he had ever breathed before. The ceiling arched high above him, the architecture impossibly smooth, as if the entire structure had been crafted from a single seamless piece of material. And yet, for all its beauty, Nathan felt none of the awe he might have under different circumstances. He was trapped. His chest rose and fell sharply as the realization crashed over him. Helios 4 was gone. The station he had spent years working on, the life he had built, disappearing beneath them as the ship ascended into the cold void of space. His breath came out unsteady, hands clenching into fists at his sides. His pulse was still hammering in his ears, but the initial adrenaline was fading, leaving behind something far worse. Anger. His eyes snapped toward Aurora, who had moved to stand near the center of the chamber. The Celestian soldiers had released their hold on him, seemingly confident he wouldn't or couldn't run. Nathan's voice came out rough. What the hell was that? Aurora turned, meeting his glare with complete composure. I told you, she said. You will understand soon. That's not good enough. His voice rose, the pressure in his chest threatening to explode. You invaded my home. You attacked people who had nothing to do with this. He broke off, breathing hard, shaking his head as the weight of it all hit him at once. You took me, and you won't even tell me why. Aurora studied him for a long moment before she spoke again. I did not take you. There was something strange in her tone. Not quite cold, but not apologetic either. I reclaimed you. Nathan's body tensed at the choice of words. Something about the way she said it, the certainty in her voice, made his stomach twist in a way he didn't understand. She wasn't speaking like someone who thought she was right. She was speaking like someone who knew. Nathan forced himself to hold her gaze, despite the turmoil clawing at his thoughts. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to fight back even though he knew it was useless. But for the first time, a small, insidious thought crept into his mind. What if she's telling the truth? He crushed the thought down immediately. It didn't matter what she believed. He wasn't one of them. And no matter what she or anyone else said, he wasn't theirs. Nathan was led through the impossibly smooth corridors of the Celestian ship, his every step heavy with resentment. The walls around him pulsed faintly, alive with a quiet energy that made his skin prickle. It was unlike any vessel he had ever seen, grander, more advanced, and yet eerily silent. The usual mechanical hum of an engine was absent, replaced by a low, rhythmic vibration that felt more like a pulse than machinery. It unsettled him, but not as much as the reality of his situation. He wasn't supposed to be here. His fists clenched as he was ushered into a vast chamber unlike anything on Helios 4. The walls stretched high into an arched ceiling that shimmered like liquid silver. Translucent panels cast a soft, ethereal glow, illuminating intricate patterns carved into the metallic surface. A massive window dominated one side of the room, offering an unobstructed view of deep space, stars stretching endlessly in every direction. It was breathtaking in a way Nathan refused to acknowledge. At the center of the room stood Aurora. She had shed the imposing presence of the warrior who had commanded his capture. Here she seemed different, calmer, her piercing blue eyes less of a blade and more of an assessment. She stood tall, regal, as if the weight of an entire civilization rested on her shoulders. Nathan's patience had already been stretched past its limit. His entire life had been ripped away in a matter of minutes, and now he was standing in a room designed for royalty, being watched by a woman who seemed to think she knew something he didn't. His anger bubbled over. "Who the hell do you think I am?" His voice was sharp, filled with raw frustration. Aurora did not flinch. She regarded him with the same unshaken certainty she had displayed since the moment she laid eyes on him. "You are Nathan Valerian," she said evenly, "the last heir to the Celestian throne." Nathan let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. This was madness. "That's insane," he snapped. "I'm not a prince. I fix broken machines. I don't rule empires." Aurora exhaled softly, as if she had expected this reaction. "You may not remember, but that does not change the truth." Nathan took a step back, his pulse quickening. "Number I don't remember because it's not true. his hands curled into fists at his sides. Whatever story you've convinced yourself of, I don't have anything to do with it. I was born on Earth. I grew up in the colonies. He cut himself off, because the way Aurora was watching him, the quiet patience in her expression, made something tighten in his chest. You were sent to Earth, she corrected gently, to keep you safe. Nathan swallowed hard, forcing out a dry chuckle. Safe? From what? Aurora studied him for a moment before answering. From the ones who wanted you dead. His breath hitched before he could stop it. Aurora took a slow step toward him, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. The Celestian Empire was once the greatest force in the known galaxy, she said. A dynasty of rulers blessed with abilities that made them more than leaders. They were the foundation of our people. But power is never without enemies. There were those who feared what the throne represented, those who sought to destroy it. Nathan could feel the weight of her words pressing against him, like a story he had heard before but had long forgotten. 23 years ago, she continued, an insurrection rose from within. It was swift, brutal. The royal family was targeted. Those loyal to the throne fought to protect what remained, but one thing mattered above all else: ensuring that the last heir survived. Nathan's stomach twisted. You were only a child when it happened, Aurora said. Barely 2 years old. Too young to understand what was happening. But even then, you were marked, by birth, by blood. A trusted guardian smuggled you away before the throne fell, taking you to the only place you could disappear completely. He didn't have to ask. He already knew the answer. Earth, he murmured. Aurora nodded. You were hidden among humans, raised without knowledge of your heritage. It was the only way to keep you safe. Nathan's heartbeat pounded against his ribs. His entire life, every moment he had believed was his own, was being rewritten in front of him. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Why now? He asked, voice tight. Why take me now if I've been so well hidden? Aurora hesitated just briefly, but it was enough for him to notice. Because your bloodline has awakened, she finally said. For years, we searched. But only when the dormant power within you began to stir did we finally find you. Nathan shook his head. He didn't believe in fate, in destiny, in mystical bloodlines. He believed in science, in things that could be seen, measured, proven. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're telling me I've got some kind of hidden power inside me? Aurora's lips curled into the faintest smile, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. Your blood tells a different story. Nathan exhaled sharply, turning away from her, dragging a hand through his hair. He could still see Helios 4 in his mind, still hear Dawson's voice shouting after him as he was dragged onto this ship. You can't just take him. But they had. And now, standing in this grand alien chamber, he realized the worst part. They weren't lying. He didn't know how he knew it, but he did. The pieces he had ignored all his life. The unexplainable instincts, the strange moments where he felt things before they happened. All of it was pressing against the back of his mind, demanding to be acknowledged. He spun back around, meeting Aurora's steady gaze. If I was hidden, he said slowly, then why are you telling me all this? If you're so sure I'm this lost prince, then what do you want from me? Aurora's expression didn't change. We want you to take back what was stolen from you. A chill ran down his spine. You think I'm going to help you reclaim an empire? He scoffed. I'm not a ruler. I don't care about your war. You don't have to care, Aurora said. You only have to survive. Nathan narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Aurora's voice lowered slightly, but the weight behind it didn't diminish. It means the ones who took your throne never stopped looking for you. And now that you've awakened, now that they know you exist, they will come for you. A slow dread crept through him, sinking deep into his bones. He had spent his entire life believing he was just another engineer, another worker in a galaxy too big to notice him. But that illusion had been shattered the moment he was taken from Helios 4. And now, whether he wanted it or not, he was part of something far bigger than himself. Nathan took a steadying breath, forcing himself to stand taller despite the storm raging in his head. "Then I guess I don't have a choice," he said quietly. Aurora's expression softened just slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You always have a choice," she murmured. "But the galaxy won't wait for you to make it." Nathan clenched his jaw, his mind still screaming at him to reject everything she had told him. But deep down, in the part of him he had long ignored, he already knew. His life had never really belonged to him. Not since the day he was born. The silence that had settled between Nathan and Aurora shattered as the ship's alarms blared to life. An urgent, pulsing wail that sent a ripple of tension through the already fragile moment. The soft blue glow of the chamber's walls shifted to a deep red, casting stark shadows across the metallic surfaces. Nathan felt the change in the air instantly. Something was wrong. Aurora's head snapped toward the holographic interface embedded in the center of the room, her expression sharpening as she flicked her fingers across the controls. The projection shifted, displaying a tactical readout of the surrounding space. What he saw made his stomach drop. A fleet was approaching. Dozens of ships, sleek and black, arranged in an ironclad formation that left no room for doubt. They weren't simply passing through. They were here for this ship. They were hunting something. Nathan didn't need to ask what. Before he could process the implications, a new holographic window materialized in the air before them, and a figure appeared. A man with sharp, angular features and piercing crimson eyes. His uniform was a stark contrast of black and silver, a jagged insignia marking his rank on his chest. He exuded a controlled menace, the kind that didn't need to shout to command authority. Nathan didn't know who he was, but the look in Aurora's eyes told him everything he needed to. "Tactician," she murmured under her breath, like the title alone carried the weight of something dark. The man on the screen finally spoke, his voice like a blade cutting through the tension in the room. "Aurora Valis. You have something that does not belong to you." Aurora remained still, composed, though Nathan could see the barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. "You are not in a position to make demands, Ravik." Ravik. Nathan committed the name to memory even as his pulse hammered against his ribs. The Zalorian commander didn't react to her defiance. His gaze flickered to Nathan, and something in his expression shifted ever so slightly. An amusement barely veiled beneath cold calculation. "There you are," he said, as if he had been looking for Nathan his entire life. Nathan's spine stiffened involuntarily. "I don't know who the hell you think I am, but I'm—" "Spare me," Ravik cut him off, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Your ignorance does not change what you are." Nathan swallowed hard. He didn't like the way Ravik was looking at him. "As you know," Ravik continued, turning his attention back to Aurora, "I have no interest in drawn-out conflicts. Hand over the heir, and I will allow you and your people to leave unscathed." Aurora let out a slow breath, her shoulders squaring. "And what happens to him if I comply?" Ravik's smirk widened. "Does it matter?" A sharp, ice-cold fury flashed across Aurora's face before she masked it just as quickly. Nathan didn't need to know the full history between these two to understand that there was something deeper happening here. But all he could focus on was the singular word that kept echoing in his mind. Heir. They really believed this. All of them. Aurora. Ravik. The Celestians. The Zalorians. Nathan didn't want to be a part of any of this. Didn't want to be fought over like some prize neither side had ever bothered asking him about. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, raking a hand through his hair. "I'm not worth dying for." Aurora turned to him then, her blue eyes steady and unwavering. "To us, you are." The words stopped him cold. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in her voice. She meant it. Before Nathan could respond, Ravik sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "I tire of this. You know how this ends." The screen flickered out. For a split second, silence reigned. Then the ship lurched. Nathan stumbled back, gripping the nearest surface for balance, as the deck beneath them shuddered violently. The red warning lights overhead flashed in rapid succession, accompanied by the sharp, clipped voices of Celestian officers relaying tactical updates over the ship's comms. They had opened fire. Aurora was already moving. She turned toward the door with swift efficiency, issuing commands as she went. "Shields to full capacity! Reroute power from non-essential systems to reinforce the core!" Nathan barely managed to keep his balance as the ship rocked from another impact. He could hear the distant rumble of weapons fire being exchanged, feel the weight of the battle pressing down around him. And then, it hit him. They were going to die if they didn't find a way out of this. Instinct kicked in. Nathan spun on his heel, eyes scanning the tactical readout still flickering in the air. His mind worked at lightning speed, breaking down the situation like a machine in need of repair. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a leader. But he was an engineer, and right now, this ship was a broken system in need of fixing. He rushed toward the control panel, fingers flying across the interface before his hesitation could catch up to him. "You need to adjust your energy distribution," he called over his shoulder. "The shields are absorbing too much direct impact, but the way they're configured, you're leaving the rear engines vulnerable." Aurora stopped mid-stride, turning to him. Nathan didn't wait for approval. He zoomed in on the tactical readout, pinpointing the blind spot in their current defensive stance. "You're fighting in a straight line, but they're keeping you boxed in to limit your movement. If you reroute power to the left thrusters and initiate a controlled spin on my mark, you can disrupt their targeting systems long enough to break free." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Aurora tilted her head, considering. "Will it work?" Nathan exhaled sharply. "It's either that, or stay here and let them blow us apart." Another impact rocked the ship. Aurora didn't hesitate after that. "Do it." Nathan didn't waste another second. He bypassed the automated systems, manually diverting power where it was needed most. The ship groaned in protest, but he knew the systems could take it. He had always known how machines worked, how they felt under strain. And right now, this ship was begging to be freed. He braced himself as the thrusters roared to life. The vessel lurched sideways in a controlled spin, the sudden movement catching the Zalorian fleet off guard. Their weapons fire missed as the Celestian ship twisted out of their predicted trajectory. Nathan clenched his teeth, holding his breath. A few more seconds, just a little more. Then, suddenly, they were free. The enemy ships scrambled to adjust, but by the time they corrected their course, the Celestian vessel was already surging forward, leaving the battle behind. The alarms quieted. The tension in the air didn't immediately dissipate, but there was a noticeable shift, a collective exhale of relief. Nathan leaned back against the console, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, his heart pounding against his ribs. Aurora turned to him, something unreadable in her gaze. "You just saved this ship," she said. Nathan swallowed, forcing out a dry chuckle. "I just didn't feel like dying today." Aurora studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "You are more than what you believe yourself to be, Nathan Valerian." He tensed at the name. He wasn't sure he was ready to hear it, but as the stars stretched before them, vast and endless, he had the strangest feeling that, ready or not, it didn't matter. The ship's medical bay was eerily quiet, the hum of the ship's engines a faint backdrop to the chaos still lingering in Nathan's mind. Aurora lay motionless on the medical table, her breathing shallow, her normally commanding presence reduced to a fragile, lifeless stillness. Nathan stood frozen beside her, hands curled into tight fists, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had barely escaped, barely made it out of that ambush alive, only for her to collapse the moment they entered the ship's atmosphere. It wasn't just an ordinary wound. One of the Celestian medics hovered over her, his face unreadable as he worked quickly, scanning her vitals with a sleek device that emitted a faint blue glow. Another medic, a woman with sharp, analytical eyes, turned to Aurora's armor, peeling back the damaged plating. Beneath it, a wound pulsed with an unnatural glowing energy, deep crimson veins spreading from the point of impact, like a slow-moving poison. "It's a Zalorian toxin," the male medic murmured. His voice was grim. designed to destabilize Celestian biology at the molecular level. It's lethal if untreated. Nathan's chest tightened. Then treat it. The medic hesitated. There is only one cure, the female medic said, glancing at him. Celestian royal blood. Nathan's mind stalled. What? The male medic didn't look up from his instruments. The Zalorians engineered this toxin to be incurable to ordinary Celestians. It's meant to neutralize our strongest warriors. But the bloodline of the royal family carries regenerative properties. Aurora's own would have healed her if she hadn't lost too much already. Nathan stared at them, the weight of their words sinking like iron into his gut. So what are you saying? The female medic looked directly at him. She will die unless we find a royal blood donor. Silence stretched between them. Aurora's face was pale, her breathing uneven. She had fought so hard to keep him alive, to protect him, when he hadn't even understood why. And now, when it mattered most, she was slipping away right in front of him. Something inside him twisted, a sharp and undeniable certainty settling into his bones. He stepped forward, rolling up his sleeve without hesitation. Then take mine. The medics hesitated, exchanging wary glances. You don't understand, the male medic said. Even if you are of the royal bloodline, your genetics have been dormant your entire life. There's no guarantee. I don't care. Nathan's voice was firm, unshaken. Try. The female medic didn't argue. She simply nodded and moved swiftly, preparing the transfusion. Nathan sat beside Aurora, watching as the thin tubing connected him to her, their bloodlines intertwining in a way that felt both impossibly surreal and terrifyingly real. At first, nothing happened. Then the room shifted. A strange warmth bloomed in his chest, spreading outward like an unseen current. His fingers curled involuntarily against the armrest as something deeper than pain, deeper than exhaustion, pulsed beneath his skin. It was like a dormant piece of himself. Something he had never known was there. Was stirring. Aurora's breathing steadied. Nathan exhaled sharply, his vision tilting slightly as a wave of dizziness washed over him. The monitors beeped with renewed vigor, the spreading toxin within Aurora's body receding, as if it had never been there. Her eyes fluttered open. For the first time since this nightmare began, Aurora looked at him. Not as a soldier, not as a protector, but as if she were truly seeing him. You saved me, she murmured, her voice weak but certain. Nathan swallowed, his hands still trembling from whatever had just happened to him. Guess that makes us even. Aurora's lips curled into the faintest smile. No, she said softly. We are only just beginning. Nathan sat in the quiet of the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space stretching endlessly before him. Stars burned in the distance, their cold, distant glow reminding him of just how small he had once believed himself to be. But after everything that had happened, after the battle, after the blood transfusion that had saved Aurora's life, he knew he wasn't small. Not anymore. He had spent his whole life thinking he was just another person in a universe too large to notice him. A mechanic, a worker, someone replaceable, forgettable. But now, people had risked their lives for him, killed for him, fought against overwhelming odds because of what he represented. And no matter how much he had wanted to deny it, the truth had forced its way into his reality. He was Nathan Valerian, the last heir to a fallen empire. He heard footsteps behind him, measured and deliberate, and he didn't need to turn to know it was Aurora. She stopped beside him, silent for a moment, gazing out at the same endless horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was something different in it now, something heavier. We are at war, Nathan, she said. They won't stop hunting you. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of that truth settle in his chest. There had been a time, not so long ago, when he would have run from this, when he would have rejected it outright, denied it until there was nothing left to deny. But running hadn't worked. Ignoring it hadn't made it any less real. Nathan's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the console. He could feel something new inside himself now. Something more than fear, more than doubt. A quiet, unshakable resolve. His entire life, he had never belonged anywhere. Now, for the first time, he did. He turned his gaze back to the stars, drawing in a deep breath before speaking. Then it's time to stop running. Beside him, Aurora was silent for a beat. Then slowly, she smiled. Not the guarded, strategic expression she had worn since the moment they met. Not the knowing smirk of someone who had always been 2 steps ahead. This was something else entirely, something real. For the first time, there was no distance between them. The war was coming. The enemy wouldn't stop. But Nathan wasn't afraid anymore, because now he knew who he was, and he was ready. Across the galaxies, across time itself. You've found your way here. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Let's see how far across the universe our community reaches. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's episode will take you even deeper into the unknown. You won't want to miss it.